Hope everyone's having a pleasant afternoon. We are heading back up from South Carolina to the Washington, D.C. area. We unexpectedly found ourselves having to shoot down there yesterday at the last minute, literally at 4:30 p.m. As we were finishing our trip to D.C. this week. We were at a conference Monday through Wednesday, and then yesterday, Thursday, we were just getting some work done and doing a little sightseeing. And as we were finishing the sightseeing up on Capitol Hill, Supreme Court, Library of Congress area, we got a phone call that turned into a couple of phone calls that turned into an urgent last-minute order for about a half a pallet of medical supplies going to the Middle East. And they had to be there basically immediately to be hand-carried onto commercial aircraft straight to the Middle East, straight into the combat zone. And this is the kind of thing that's happened to us before on a couple of occasions. And when we have exhausted our supplies, which we did in this case, then you either got to get on a plane or you got to drive to the source, get the stuff, and bring it yourself to the customer so they can have it when they need it. And in this case, it was a 24-hour turnaround. A required 24-hour turnaround. And so, and it's again, just shy of a pallet, and you're not going to believe it, but we were able to fit it all into this car. That's 250 combat tourniquets there in the front seat and the passenger seat. There's another 750 in the back seat. Can't really see them too well. And another 1,000 in the trunk area. 8 cases, that big. Again, about a 35-inch tall pallet. And we were able to fit it all in the Tesla, in the Model S. And then tomorrow morning, about half of it will be delivered in Philadelphia, half of it will be delivered in New York City, and it's going to wind up in the air, wheels up, to the Middle East, specifically Israel, by about mid to late afternoon tomorrow. And again, this all came about at 4:30 p.m. yesterday, as it tends to. And so, what does that have to do with the Tesla? Well, it just so happened that we had the Tesla with us this week in Washington, D.C. for our conference that we attended there. And again, we were getting ready to go home yesterday afternoon, late afternoon, and instead found ourselves driving about 8-10 hours due south on Interstate 95. Although actually we couldn't take 95 because seeing as how it was D.C. rush hour, if you've been in that city and spent time there or lived or worked there, you know that nothing gets anywhere on I-95 in any reasonable amount of time during rush hour. So we actually had to shoot out on 66 toward Winchester, and then instead of going all the way out and then jumping on 81, Interstate 81 headed south, we jumped off of 66 and got on US 15 and US 29 through Lynchburg, Charlottesville, those areas, kind of straddling the middle between Interstate 95 and 81 as you go north-south along the eastern seaboard. And it was a very, very pretty drive, to be honest. And we just kind of want to throw some more context in there because the last time we chatted, we talked about the full self-driving system, or FSD, which is Tesla's advanced driver assistance package. And they've got a couple different flavors of it, and the basic one is just called Autopilot. And what Autopilot does is that it will speed up, slow down with traffic, and then keep you in the lane. And that's all it does. And maybe do some basic accident avoidance. Daytime, nighttime, and even in pretty rainy weather. And we've had the basic Autopilot on this car since we bought it at the end of June, put 15,000 miles on it, including one day when we did 925 miles. And it works great. It works just great. It's about a 90% perfect solution in terms of getting you down the road on long trips, or even on shorter trips through heavy traffic, and reducing your mental workload, making you a safer driver by keeping you from having to spend every second of every minute of every hour of the day adjusting your steering, adjusting your throttle to keep yourself in the lane that you're driving in and at the speed you want to go. The next step up is called the EAP, or Enhanced Autopilot, and that does things like automating lane changes. So all you got to do is get on the blinker, and then the car will decide if it's safe to change lanes, and then the car will execute the lane change automatically without you having to do any of it. And I'll show you that again. All you do is get on the blinker, and the car decides if it can make a lane change safely, and then it does it. And then I think Enhanced Autopilot also does a little bit of navigation in terms of getting you, taking your on and off ramps and sort of navigating you through the forks and, rerouting you depending on traffic. You see we're coming up on Richmond here, and it's got some traffic, and you never know, is the car going to try to navigate us around that? Take some shortcuts, take some detours. And so that's Enhanced Autopilot. And then FSD, or Full Self-Driving, is the third and most advanced flavor that Tesla offers, and that does things like navigating you through city streets, navigating you through red lights, taking left and right turns on crowded city streets. And so if you've got a car that's got the basic autopilot, as every Tesla does, you have the option to purchase Enhanced Autopilot, or EAP, for $6,000, and then you have the option to either purchase or do a subscription for Full Self-Driving, or FSD. And if you want to pay up front, it's $15,000, and I can't imagine anybody actually does that. Or you could subscribe for $200 a month to Full Self-Driving. And we've said on many occasions that you don't need Full Self-Driving. It's essentially a luxury and an option, and something that is not necessary in the least. But knowing that we were going to be doing some driving today, not knowing exactly how much, or I should say knowing that we were going to be doing some driving this week, just kind of for research purposes, we signed up and subscribed and paid the $200 for a month of Full Self-Driving, or FSD, and activated it last Sunday night, and then used it during the drive down to DC last Monday. And in a word, it works great on highways. It works very, very well. We did identify its weakness pretty early on, its major weakness being that it really likes to get into the passing lane and park itself there, even if it's not passing anybody, and even if the lane over to the right is wide open. And that's a huge problem, because it creates massive amounts of congestion behind you, and you get cars backing up, and you get cars that are pissed off, and then they start to do dangerous maneuvers and trying to pass you on the right at 90 miles an hour to get around you. And it's just entirely unsafe and entirely unnecessary. But the car, for some reason, doesn't have the sense to stay out of the passing lane, or to get into it when it needs to pass someone, and then get the hell out when it's done passing someone. And we noticed on the drive down to DC, again last Monday morning, and then additionally on the drive from DC down to South Carolina last night, that it will randomly, out of the blue, even if nobody is on the highway, even if it's just you, it'll just randomly jump into the passing lane because it feels like cruising in the passing lane. And again, it doesn't have the sense, and the engineers at Tesla didn't give it the sense to know to stay the hell out of the way if it's not passing someone. And we've talked about that at length. But again, it's just been a disappointment. And we're doing manual lane changes now, and telling it to get out of the passing lane, because it won't do it on its own. And it's just been a huge disappointment. It's like that car there, just sitting there, camped out in the left lane. And the Tesla doesn't have any consciousness of the fact that there's like 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 cars lined up behind it, and it's just sitting there going the speed limit without a care in the world, like a Prius driver. And in our first drive, which was maybe 250 miles down to DC, we noticed that early and often, and it never got better, and it never even tried to do anything about it. And then we noticed it again on the drive down from DC to South Carolina last night, again, where it would not only get in the passing lane to pass people, but on an empty highway, it would just randomly get in the passing lane to cruise when it was in the right lane, and you have to stop it and just kind of continue over and over again to force it to get out of the way. The other thing I'll say is that when you're driving on city streets, as we did in DC, and again, if you know anything about DC, the streets are very busy there. You got a lot of cross traffic, you got a lot of people turning in front of you, that kind of thing. The full self-driving system just is not ready for prime time. This is not the newest one, which is version 12. This is not the newest hardware, which is version 4. This is FSD version, I think 11.4.4, and the hardware version 3. So it's not the absolute newest, but it's new enough. And it works well enough on the highway, but it just doesn't work that well in city streets. And if you've seen that video of Elon taking 45 minutes to drive a Tesla all through like Silicon Valley, and he goes to Zuckerberg's house, he goes all over the place, and basically never has to intervene or touch the steering wheel, because the car does everything. Version 11, which we're using, isn't anywhere close to being that good inside the city limits on a city street. But on the highway, it actually works very well, and it actually does a very good job of reducing your workload even further below the level that plain old autopilot does for you. And it's impossible to understand unless you experience it for yourself. It's just absolutely life-changing. It turns you from a driver into a supervisor. And all you got to do is just keep your hand on the wheel in case you need to intervene, and sit back and relax and watch the car do its thing. It's got its display here, which shows you, the blue line, which is where the car is trying to go. On the right there, it shows you the speed that you've set. That's got that blue circle around it, and then it's got the speed that it's actually going, which is limited by the truck in front of us. And even though we're going like 5 miles an hour below our set speed limit, for some reason the car doesn't feel like pulling out and passing this 18-wheeler. So again, you got to do a lot of prompting the car to get around people. And every now and then it makes you wiggle the steering wheel just to prove that you're still awake and paying attention. But for the most part, it just does its thing. And all you got to do is kick back and relax. Again, as we indicated before, the Model S and the X have a real instrument panel. The Model 3 and the Model Y do not. And so for that reason alone, the S and the X are a lot easier to live with. The 3 and the Y, they've got a screen in the center, just as this car does. But their screen is like landscape mode instead of portrait mode. And because they've got to jam all these functions and everything into one display, the map is a whole lot smaller. It's a tiny little map. It's less than half the size of this map that you get in the vertical screen on the Model S and the Model X. And you get your speedometer in there, and you got to like constantly look over to the right just to check your speed. And I think you got to look over to the right to like adjust your windshield wipers and stuff like that. And so it's kind of a disaster in terms of like usability and ergonomics. compared to the S and the X. Now this is the 2020 Model S, and in 21 they refreshed the S and the X, and they changed the screen from portrait mode to landscape mode. And so that's actually the reason we bought this car, because we prefer the portrait mode screen. It's just got a much bigger map. You can kind of shush your turn-by-turn directions out of the way, and it gives you a gigantic map with like amazing amounts of detail on it. And if you're middle-aged and your eyes are starting to go, it's just helpful to have a bigger map. And so our biggest observation in an impromptu 8-hour drive last night is how easy it was to get on the road, and at the end of an 8-hour workday, after being awake for more than 10 hours and drive another 8 hours non-stop through an unfamiliar area. We'd never taken that route through like Lynchburg and Charlottesville, and it was just the easiest thing in the world. Very, very relaxing. And we just drove until we got tired. We drove until around 11 p.m. and I pulled over, dropped out for the night, got back up, got on the road, and kept on trucking. Made it down to the factory by around 11 a.m. today. Made the pickup, got back on the road, and we'll be back in DC by around, call it 10 p.m. tonight. And any other car would leave the driver exhausted, absolutely exhausted, after a couple of long days like that, doing lots and lots and lots of miles. In this car, it's just a pleasure. It's just complete relaxation. You can take your phone calls. You can, think about all kinds of other stuff that you got to do, and not sit there all day sweating bullets trying to keep the car between the lane dividers and speed up and slow down. And okay, let somebody get past us here. Again, the one thing you have to do is keep the car from blocking traffic, because it has no consciousness of the fact that it's making itself into an obstacle by parking itself in the passing lane. And then the other thing we'll mention is that last night, as it got darker and darker, we started to get an error message saying that one of the cameras was like obscured, and that FSD was going to, like, FSD might disengage. It didn't actually happen, but we just kept getting a warning every now and then that one or more of the cameras was like blocked or obscured or couldn't get an image, and so FSD potentially might turn off, and it actually never did turn off. But I think when you're like surrounded in darkness and there's no other car's headlights illuminating the lane dividers and illuminating the signs and things like that, the car starts to get spooked, and it is biased in the direction of just disengaging FSD if it doesn't have total confidence that it knows what's going on all around it. Not sure that it's got a camera facing directly to the rear. I don't think it does. I think it's got cameras in the fenders that are facing like to the right rear and the left rear to monitor your blind spots. I think they're in the front fenders, again facing to your like left rear and right rear. But there's nothing, I don't think there's any cameras looking directly to the rear. And so that's where you have an actual blind spot, like to your 6 o'clock. And that's part of the reason why the car doesn't ever make an effort to get the hell out of the way and let other people pass it, because it may not even know that there are people behind it, drivers behind it. But it shouldn't have to, is the point. The point is that whether or not there's anybody behind you, you just need to get the hell out of the way. Like they do in Germany, And that's why you can safely drive on the highway going 60 or 80 or 100 or 120 or 150 miles an hour. And different drivers do that all day, every day, and they coexist safely because they're all following the same rules. Whereas this car and most other American drivers has no interest in following the rules in that one area. And so those are some other observations to pass along. And the question is what the real question is whether FSD is worth it or not. Whether it's worth it to pay the $200 for full self-driving on top of the car payment you're already making. Because the majority of customers are buying their cars on credit, on a payment, and not just dropping 50, 60, 80,000 bucks in cash for their cars. And so these cars are not cheap, although the prices do seem to keep coming down continuously. But still, you're making a payment that's very substantial. And the question is, do you really want to spend another $199 a month on full self-driving? And I guess the answer is that it's a definite maybe. If you're the kind of person who drives 9,000 miles in the course of a month, as we did in July in this car, plus whatever we drove in our other vehicles. We got an F-150, we got an F-350. If you're the kind of person who does a lot of road trips where you are having to do a lot of navigation and taking off ramps and taking on ramps and rerouting yourself around traffic, maybe it's rush hour traffic, maybe it's accidents, and you don't know the roads like the back of your hand. If you're the kind of person that hates to deal with stop and go traffic, if you're the kind of person that again has a very busy job and you're taking a lot of phone calls, for all those reasons, it might be worth it to you to pay the $200, $199 a month to subscribe to full self-driving. Again, you don't need it. The basic autopilot can get you where you need to go. It's just that you're going to be substantially more involved with the car than you would otherwise. Every time you have to change lanes with basic autopilot, you are disengaging autopilot and then re-engaging it when you get back in the lane. It's not taking on-ramps for you and off-ramps. It's not getting you in the lane you need to be in for a fork that's coming up in a couple of miles. None of that. It's not navigating you around slower traffic. And so you can certainly live with basic autopilot, and it's 90% of the way to perfection. And then I'd say enhanced autopilot, or EAP, is about a 95% solution. And then full self-driving, or FSD, is about a 98% solution. And it just depends how close you want to get to perfection. And again, how many miles you're driving every day. Again, we did an 8-hour day yesterday. We're probably going to do a 10-hour day today. And that's just an extreme amount of driving. And in terms of your percentages of having an accident, anything you could do to get your percentage or your probability as close to zero as possible, you just really ought to do it. And while $200 a month might seem like a lot to pay, think about all the lost work and all the lost, all the damage and all the medical bills and all that other stuff that you will pay if and when you get into a major accident on or off the highway. And I guess that's another way to look at it. Something to think about. When you do a lot of driving, you get mentally fatigued and you start making bad decisions, unsafe decisions toward the end of the day. Now, we don't drive tired. We always get a good night's sleep to the best of our ability. And we don't drive in, past midnight, hardly ever. Nobody should. But even so, even after 4 or 5 hours, even in the middle of the day, even at like 2 p.m., 4 p.m., you're still getting a little bit tired. You're still starting to make, potentially, you're starting to make sloppy decisions. And so, So anything you can do to improve your safety, you really need to. And I guess that's the verdict as of now. After doing about, let's call it 250 on Monday, probably another 400 yesterday, probably another, I'm going to say 1,000 plus miles this week using full self-driving. If you do a lot of driving, it's absolutely worth it in terms of the convenience, in terms of the peace of mind. And if you just want to absolutely maximize your chance of arriving safely at your destination every single day, FSD is probably worth it. Can you live without it? Yes. Is basic autopilot unsafe? No, it isn't. But FSD, full self-driving, just gets you a little bit closer to perfection in terms of reducing your probability of having a major accident to the absolute bare minimum that it possibly can. And then I'm going to throw, and I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. The one other thing I'll mention is the fact that people are constantly saying over and over again, I'm just not ready for an EV. I'm not ready for an electric vehicle because the charging networks, the charging infrastructure, it's just not there. And I'm here to tell you, if you're driving a Tesla, that is completely false. There is practically nowhere in the United States you can't go in a Tesla where there's going to be chargers on the way and chargers at the destination. Practically nowhere. We've gone all over the country in this Tesla and in our previous Tesla, and there's chargers, Tesla chargers, every damn place you need to go, and spaced out appropriately in between, so that you never have to drive more than about 150 miles in between chargers. And when you stop to charge, you never have to wait more than about 15-20 minutes to get back on the road. And so like your day becomes about 2 hours driving and about 15 minutes charging, and then about another 2 hours driving and another 15 minutes charging. And you kind of do that indefinitely until you get where you're going. As long as you got a car that's a Tesla that's new enough, unlike our previous one, which is a 2016, which had awful range. You were going like maybe 90 minutes and then stopping for like 40 or 50. And that was ridiculous. That made it impossible to take road trips. This thing, again, you drive 2 hours, 2.5 hours, stop for 15 or 20 minutes. And again, everywhere you need to go, there's chargers when you get there and chargers on the way. To where it's just not an issue. It's just not an issue. With other brands, yeah, with the Ford, you've probably seen that story of some guy in Canada that wanted to take a family road trip in his electric F-150, and he had to give up and have it towed to a Ford dealer and then rent a gas engine vehicle to do his road trip because of how awful the charging experience was. And that's the case in the Fords, that's the case in a lot of other brands, but not in a Tesla in the year 2023. Is it the perfect vehicle? No. That's why we have an F-150, and that's why we have an F-350, because it doesn't do everything. It doesn't tow a trailer. But in terms of, again, shooting halfway across the country, or shooting 10 hours up and down the East Coast at a moment's notice, it's basically perfect for that. All right, I think it's all I got for today. Thanks, everyone. Hope you're having a pleasant day. And we'll talk to you later.